30 years ago, a crime of passion took away the life of young mum Pauline Barlow.
He couldn't have what he wanted, he couldn't have her, so nobody had her in the end.
Her children, Diane and Ray, have never got over her death, and having to live with her killer only made it harder.
You know, you have to live with your dad when you're a kid, because that's supposedly the best place for children to be, with their natural parents.
I just asked him, I goes, why did you do it? And he just shrugged his shoulders. I don't know, Ray. And I was just like, is that it?
I think hate is a very strong word, but I really despise that man.
It was about him having total power and control over that person's life that, you know, he killed her.
I feel like whatever happens to me now, it's nothing. The worst thing that can ever happen to anybody is probably already happened to me.
This is what it's like, living with murder. Pauline was the eldest daughter of Horace and Elizabeth Barlow. A happy family of 5, sisters Linda and Jean used to look up to Pauline.
She was always there for you. She was very caring, always thought about others. She liked a good time, she liked to enjoy herself. But on the whole, she was a good big sister, yeah. Yeah, she was. Someone to be proud of, yeah. We didn't really, as sisters, argue a lot. And we didn't in later life argue a lot. I used to pinch her clothes when she was younger. She didn't like that. She used to go mad about that.
Oh, Pauline was lovely. She always used to take me everywhere, make me laugh. It was great. And my mum and dad, you know, happy days.
The girls had spent most of their childhood in Australia, but in 1961, Pauline's parents decided to return to England for a while to visit relatives. It was then that 16-year-old Pauline met Ronald Benton.
He was all right. Then, bit dopey. I just thought they was happy and that was it.
We hadn't been back that long and Mum and Dad wanted to go back. They desperately wanted to go back. And she'd met him and he wouldn't come. He didn't want to come. So Mum and Dad asked her, well, will you get married before we go? So we can, you know. So it was sort of a very rushed affair. I mean, they lived with his sister.
When she got married, I was a bridesmaid. And I was just crying because I didn't want her to leave. Because I loved her that much.
And then once they got married and that, Mum and Dad didn't want to go anyhow, they didn't want to leave her.
Pauline and Ronald soon started a family. Diane was born in 1968, followed 2 years later by Raymond.
I was big sister and I used to always, you know, look after him. Played in the garden a lot, playing in the swimming pool, and we used to have seesaw, we used to play on that. We used to go on family holidays a lot with the grandparents and my aunts, my uncles.
It was always happy little family sort of thing. And my dad played darts a lot. And sometimes me and my sister would go with him to certain pubs or clubs and we'd have to sit in the back room with some other people's kids who were around the pub or whatever, because my dad knew him and he was good at darts and I didn't mind letting him take his kids with him sort of thing. I didn't realise how good a darter he was at the time, but like as you get older and I started to like throw darts and hearing other people talk about how good he was, it was just like, oh, I wouldn't mind being like that.
But 6 years in, Pauline and Ronald's relationship wasn't working.
I noticed that they didn't seem happy together and a lot of the time they weren't talking to each other.
My dad was out darting 6 nights a week, I think, or 7 days with the Sunday dinner times. So he was literally putting all his life into work and then darts, rather than being a father and a husband to my mum. He always used to come back either half drunk or drunk sort of thing, so he wasn't giving my mum the love and affection what she wanted, or what she craved for, what any woman would want. But as a kid, you don't really see it like that.
They used to play fight, my dad used to call it play fighting, and they'd be rolling around on the floor and my mum would be saying, get off me, and she'd get off and she'd be crying, and she'd go to the bedroom and Dad would grab hold of us, you know, and tickle us and say, Daddy is the strongest. And we always used to side with my dad because he always used to win the play fights, and I was quite a daddy's girl anyway, so I didn't really think of how he was hurting Mum, really. And the dog would always bark as well, you know, when that was happening. And he'd kick the dog out the way and say, you know, shut up.
Pauline confided in her family about how unhappy she was at home and asked to stay with her parents for a while.
My dad said, no, you've got to go back home and sort your marriage out. No, I didn't want her to, because I could see she was unhappy. So there was nothing I could do, because I thought, well, my dad said no. That happened a couple of times, and I used to sit with her up by the field house, you know, on the bench, and she'd say, I don't want to go back.
When she went back, things got worse. On the 15th of April 1978, Pauline turned to her family again for help. It was the last time she would ask.
She rang me up, and I went up there, and she was crying, and her face was all bruised here, and the lip was, and he'd hit her that day. And so I just talked to her and said, what's up? And she said, well, I've told him I want to leave him, like, you know what I mean, that I've got somebody else. And I said, okay. Anyhow, I took her back to my house. But I always remember, late in the afternoon, she got a phone call, and it was Ron. And I always remember she took it upstairs and I was downstairs and we had the extension, and I always remember looking at that phone and thinking, I wonder what he's saying to her. She'll listen in. And then I thought, no, I better not. And the next thing I know, she said, I'm going back up home. And I said, well, and she said, I'm going back up home. And she went back up and never heard nothing for a few hours.
The phone went and I picked it up, and he just turned around and said, it's me. And I went, what do you want? He says, well, I've killed her. He says, I've killed Pauline. He says, because if I can't have her, nobody can. And I went, you are? You know, in a joke, having a laugh. I said, you better not have. And he went, well, I have, June, I've done it. And then I realised he meant it, and I was shaking, and my mum was sitting there, and I went, and my mum said, what's the matter? And then she took the phone off me.
And the next thing you know, we got a phone call off my dad to just say that he'd rung my dad to say he'd stabbed her, but he didn't know where, he didn't know how, we didn't know. And we just belted up there. I always remember going out in this dress, I've got no shoes on, and banging his door, and he just opened the door, and I can hear his words to this day. Oh, I knew you'd come. I can remember those words will always stick in my mind.
While Pauline's sisters were reeling with the shock, her children, Diane and Ray, didn't yet know she was dead. Pauline Benton was stabbed to death by her husband Ronald on the 15th of April 1978. Her sister Linda and husband Malcolm rushed over to their house just after it had happened.
And then I remember running into the living room, and he was just sitting there as cute, as calm as anything, just sitting in a chair. And I always remember looking, she used to have one of these ashtrays that stood on the floor, and if you turned it a bit, you could lift it out of its base. I always remember thinking, I'll get that ashtray and I'll smack him out. You know, I can remember doing that. And then before I knew where we were, there were police and everything there. But he just sat there, calm, nonchalant, you know, just sat there. But I mean, I never saw her. I mean, Malcolm went outside, he fell over her because it was dark and he tripped over her. The dog was locked in the shed and Raymond was in bed. Never heard none of it.
10-year-old Diane had been to Wales for the day, representing her school in a dance competition. It was her first trip away from home.
I'd won my first medal and I was very, very proud of it. And on the way home, you know, I couldn't wait to show Mum and Dad this medal I'd won. And when I got off the coach, there was nobody there. And straight away, I knew something had happened. I knew because someone would have been there otherwise. And my friend's mum said, you can walk with us. So we started to walk towards my house. And when we got to the top of the street, I could see blue flashing lights outside my house. And I can just remember walking straight towards my front porch and this police officer, female police officer, telling me to get back with your parents. And I carried on going up the drive and I said, you know, I live here, this is my home. And I just remember being swooped up at that. And I nearly got to the porch as well because I really needed to see what had happened, what was wrong. And somebody just scooped me up and handed me over the wall to the next door neighbour, and then I went into the girls' room in next door, and they said they didn't know what had happened, and I was just told to wait there. My Uncle Malcolm was coming to get me.
Diane's Uncle Malcolm drove her over to her grandparents' house, where 8-year-old Ray was already waiting.
My grandparents didn't tell me what had happened then either, and they said for me to go upstairs to bed, and I went up there. My brother was in the bed, and I woke him up and I said, what's happened? And he said, I don't know what's happened. And I said, what do you mean you don't know what's happened? You must know what's happened. How did you get here? And he said, Uncle Malcolm brought me. And I said, well, what's happened? And he said, well, I don't know, but there was just lots of people's faces when I woke up, you know.
Yeah, that's basically all I can remember. I'm just seeing all the blue flashing lights and wondering what had happened.
It was the next day that my granddad sat us down in the living room and told us what had happened. And he said, your dad has killed your mum. She was having an affair and she was leaving your dad. And he's killed her with a knife. He stabbed her in the heart. I can remember when my granddad told us that my brother started to laugh, and it's probably because my granddad always used to tell jokes with us and he probably thought this was another joke. And I sort of nudged him because everybody else had started to cry, and I sort of nudged him to say, don't laugh, and then I started to cry as well because that's what everybody else was doing. I thought that was the appropriate thing to do at that time. And it was something that just sticks in my mind, you know, that my brother was obviously so young he really didn't understand what was happening.
Diane also found it hard to take in and wanted to hear her dad's side of the story. The next day, her grandfather Horace took her to see Ronald in prison.
I thought, now I'll get a chance now to find out what's happened, if this is really true. Has my dad really killed my mum? And my dad was brought out in handcuffs and he was sobbing and crying, which I'd never ever seen my dad cry before, ever. It was something that my dad didn't do because my dad was a very tough person. And he just kept saying, I'm so, so sorry. I'm so, so sorry, kids. I'm so, so sorry. And that's all he was saying. And I thought, well, I still don't know what's actually happened. He hasn't actually told us, you know, what's happened. But the fact that he's saying sorry, he obviously has done what they're saying. And I thought, really, I didn't really want to push it too much because he seemed quite upset. And I had visions of him hanging himself in the cell or something. I didn't want to upset him, so I just said, are you okay, you know, and that sort of talk. And the visits after that were pretty much the same. We didn't talk about what had happened. But I was always hoping that he'd tell me, he'd sit me down and have a good talk with me. But he never did. He never talked about it at all. So I just felt that I couldn't ask him about it, really.
Diane's grandfather, Horace, decided that she and Ray couldn't come to their mother's funeral.
He said it wasn't a place for children to go, and I was really, really angry inside because I still didn't quite believe that she was dead, and I thought if I go to the funeral, I'll know for sure that she is, and I wanted to be part of it. And I found out later as an adult that my dad had actually asked if he could go to the funeral as well, and they were very angry about that, and they didn't want him going to the funeral, and he didn't go to the funeral, that he wasn't allowed to go, but they were worried that he was going to turn up, and they didn't want to distress us by seeing my dad stood there with handcuffs attached to prison officers. They just thought it would be too traumatic for us. And that day, while the funeral was happening, my brother and myself were in the back garden in my nan's house, and I was staring up to heaven, and I was saying, "I'm sorry I can't come, Mum, but they won't let me come."
Pauline's parents were struggling with their grief and were using whiskey and Valium to cope. To prevent Diane and Ray from being bullied at school, their grandparents decided they should tell people that Mum had died of cancer and that Dad worked abroad.
I didn't feel right really because I was lying, and there was a bit more to it than that. And when I went round to my friend's house, her dad was asking me really awkward questions. He was saying, "What country is your dad working in?" And I was saying, "I don't know," because we hadn't sort of planned all these lies. We hadn't sort of worked it all out. So I used to say, "I don't know." And then I thought, he's not going to believe me now because, you know, I should know what country he's working in. And when's he coming back? And I said, "I don't know. All I know is he's a builder," you know. And then I wouldn't go around to her house after that because I kept thinking he knows that I'm lying, you know, there's something. So there was a silence, a cover-up of what had happened, and that was really, really difficult for me to deal with because I wasn't getting any support from friends at school, from teachers, from anybody, except for obviously my mum's side of the family, who were really supportive. We'd talk about my mum all the time, we'd cry, we'd look at the photographs together, and they were supportive. But outside of the house, you know, that was the big bad world really, and I really didn't know what to say or how to act in that.
When I used to walk into a room or into a new classroom, straight away I'm thinking, oh, well, that's the one whose dad killed his mum. Every day I used to think that. I used to be in the room, then I used to go to the toilet, come back, and I used to think, oh, it's that Bantry have told him now, oh, his dad killed his mum when he was 8 years of age, blah, blah, blah. I used to think that all the time, wherever I was, I used to think somebody said something to somebody, so within a few minutes or whatever, they'd all know what had happened to me. Bizarre, because that didn't actually happen, you know, that's it, but that's how I used to think.
On the 17th of July 1978, 3 months after killing Pauline, Ronald Benton was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to just 3 years in prison.
I think back then, you know, it was known as a crime of passion because my mum was having this affair, and it was a case of if I can't have you, no one else will. And I think that's why, you know, he got away with manslaughter. But it wasn't a crime of passion, you know, it was about him having total power and control over that person's life, that, you know, he killed her. And, you know, that is, when you kill someone, that is murder. It's not accidental, it was deliberate. That was murder.
He knew what he was doing. He told me on the phone. He says, I've stabbed her in the heart 3 times running round the garden.
The injustice of Ronald's sentence took its toll on Pauline's family. Diane's grandfather, Horace, took it particularly badly, cutting Ronald out of every photo he had of him. He even suffered a heart attack on the 1st anniversary of his daughter's death.
From the day she died, he died inside. Does that make sense? He was never, ever the same person. Never. And my mum is a bit like you, and she just sort of locked it away. You never really talked about it. Now me, I'll talk about it to anybody. It's never something that I've kept, you know. I'm proud that I had another sister and I want to talk about it. Do you know what I mean?
Robbed of answers in court, Pauline's family were left to their own conclusions as to why Ronald killed her. Horace even went to see Ronald in prison to ask him face to face.
He never got no answers. All he got was it was an accident. Now, how can it be an accident when you chase somebody through the house, outside? No, you come to your senses before that, don't you? No, it wasn't an accident. The dog was locked away in the shed. He conveniently doesn't remember that because the dog would have gone for it, because the dog was poorly and stuff. I don't know what he said to her on the phone that night, that afternoon, sorry. He said something because she wasn't going till she had that phone call. I don't know. I'll never know, will I?
He couldn't have what he wanted. He couldn't have her. So nobody had her in the end. We didn't. My mum, my dad, sister. So that affected everybody, didn't it? And did he care? No.
I think hate is a very strong word, and you know, to say I hate somebody, but I really despise that man. And I don't feel as though he should, you know, whatever happened to him, bad. He can't be enough in my... Because I don't care what anybody does in this life, nobody deserves that.
My grandparents were always saying, you know, we can never forgive your dad for what he's done, and we will never forget what your dad's done. We can't do that. But they used to say, but we understand he's your dad and you love him, and if you want to have contact with him, that, you know, that's, you know, your choice, you can. And that was difficult, because if I went to the prison, I didn't talk about my dad when I went back to them. And when I went to the prison, I didn't talk about my mum or my mum's family either. So I was sort of living two separate worlds during that time, and it was quite strange, really. But as a child, you have to adapt to these situations, and I thought that was the best thing to do.
Astonishingly, Ronald only served 18 months of his 3-year sentence and came back to live in the village. Diane and Ray saw this as their dad's chance to put right his wrong and make it up to them. But it wasn't the happy reunion they were hoping for. Despite what he'd done, Diane and Ray were glad to be reunited with their dad. But he didn't seem to feel the same way.
When my dad came out of prison, he got a third refusal council house, which was in a terrible state. And we moved in, and I just thought we're going to be one normal, happy family now. And I thought that my dad would, you know, want to make things up with me, and everything would be okay. We did a lot of work on the house, but Dad had, you know, he'd sold the bungalow, and he'd got all this money, and he was out drinking a lot, spending it.
He wasn't like how I imagine a father to be with his kids. You know, like if he just took the mother away, you'd think he'd want to try and make it up to him the best he could.
It was quite a scary time for me. I started having nightmares. I kept the TV on in my bedroom, the light on in my bedroom, and I was convinced that my mum was haunting the house, and she was angry with me for living with my dad. And I told my dad this, and my dad said that he thought that she was haunting him as well, that he'd seen her on the streets, you know. So I was really frightened that time. And I felt almost like I'd betrayed my nan and granddad by living with him. But I didn't know what to do about that. I didn't know where to go, you know. I wanted to go back there and say, can I come and live with you? But you can't do that, can you? When, you know, you have to live with your dad when you're a kid. That's what people say, because that's supposedly the best place for children to be, with their natural parents. So I just carried on living with him. It wasn't a happy time at all.
It wasn't long before Ronald met another woman and moved her and her daughter into the family home.
It probably wouldn't have been so bad if she was a nice woman, like half as attractive as my mother. Wouldn't have been bad, but you can't tell people who to fall in love with, can you? So we just accepted it as it was, and it just turned out to be not very nice.
You know, you couldn't go to the shop shopping with them and say, this is what I like. It was like they didn't, both my dad and his wife, didn't want to do anything to make us happy. You know, it was everything really. We didn't go shopping, we didn't do anything, we didn't go anywhere together ever as a family. So it just felt as though we were there until we left home, and that was the best we were going to get in life. You know, so you just sort of accepted how it was. I didn't accept it very easily, I have to say. There was many a times where I'd shout and be very disrespectful towards them because I just felt, you know, that nobody actually cared about me. I just wanted a hug, you know, now and again, or a smile now and again, and I didn't get anything like that.
They was arguing nearly every night. And I used to say to my friends at school, well, I've said it recently in the last 5 or 6 years, well, that's his punishment. He's with her now, he's been married to her for I don't know how many years, 20 or 25 years or something like that. He's got away with murder, but now he's got to live with that for the rest of his life. So that was one way of looking at it.
Teenagers Diane and Ray were having to cope with being rejected by their dad, as well as life without their mum.
I was telling people at school, friends at school, what had happened, and a lot of my friends were saying, you know, how can you live with your dad? If that was my dad, I'd never live with him, I'd never forgive him. And, you know, I used to say, well, things happen, you know, that's life, isn't it? You know, you have to carry on. You know, I'd left my nan and granddad, and now I was on my own, I'd got to look after myself. So that was something that, you know, I was determined to do, determined to survive, if you like, you know, emotionally survive. So I put this brave front on and I started smoking because that was a sign that I could cope with life, when really I think the reason I started smoking was that was the way you dealt with stress. You know, I'd seen it with my nan, my granddad, my auntie, everybody smoked. So I thought maybe smoking would help me get through. And then I started going out, you know, with my friends, hanging around the streets a lot, getting in with the wrong people. I was very forgiving with people, like, you know, people that had been in trouble. I was really forgiving with them and sort of gave them a second chance, just like I'd give my dad a second chance in a way. But I started drinking a lot. I was solvent abusing, gas sniffing, glue sniffing. And the first time I started glue sniffing, it was because I wanted to help someone to get off the glue. But I can remember having a dream where my mum was there and she was just standing there staring at me. And then I wanted to do it more and more because I could see my mum. You know, it was like she was coming back to me. I was walking up railways glue sniffing, and one day I'd walked for about 2 hours and didn't know how I'd got from A to B, and then I thought, I'm going to die if I keep going down this road. So I sort of got myself together then, and I got myself a job, and I'd got a bit of money coming in, so, you know, I was able to buy my cigarettes and buy my drink, and that was how I was getting through life, really.
I rebelled, I turned into drugs, pinching, shoplifting, things like that. I can remember every time I mean, it was nearly every day, just hearing the word mum or mother, or words like knife, murder, words like that, and it's just like bring back really horrible feelings, and did really used to like upset me a lot. I feel like whatever happens to me now, it's nothing. The worst thing that can ever happen to anybody is probably already happened to me, like somebody have the mother taken away from them when they're young, been brought up having to like deal with it and not being told how to deal with it, not being told you're loved. That when you're a kid, that has a big effect on you. Not having your mum and your dad there, not having one parent there has a big effect on you. But when you ain't got both your parents there, then all of a sudden, before you know it, you're back with one of your parents with somebody else. It's just very hard to take in.
Diane was looking for love when she left home, but she soon found herself in an abusive relationship which ultimately became life-threatening.
One time when he was violent towards me, he started strangling me in front of the police and in front of my uncle. My auntie said, "You want to come and live with us, you know, for a while?" So I went back to live with my auntie Linda. So I got away from him eventually. But he was hard, and I went back with him and got, you know, kept toing and froing with him because, I don't know, he just got some sort of hold over me. I just didn't have the strength to get away from him. I was too frightened to say no to him.
Ray's own search for love was also a troubled one, and he too ended up in a violent relationship.
She wouldn't let me get out of the house. She'd lock the front door and I'd have to climb out the window if I needed to get out, or I'd have to get the key off her. Over little things, I can't remember what the arguments were over, but just silly little things, but they'd sort of rear up and get bigger and bigger and heavier and throwing things at me. It wasn't until when I was working at the company where my dad used to work, people was coming up to me pulling my top T-shirt down, and I was going, "What are you doing?" "Oh, just looking to see what marks you got on your neck." Because I was going to work with marks, bite marks, scratch marks, cuts on my face. So obviously people was talking about it at work. And it wasn't until like that day when somebody did that, I started like, "Whoa, what's going on here? They're all talking about me at work, not to my face, but behind my back. What am I doing putting up with it?" And we had an argument the one time, and it was not intentionally. I had no shoes and I kicked her. You do a roundhouse in the tit on the jaw. I couldn't believe what I'd done because she was being ever so violent with me at the time. I was blocking, holding her hands. It was just an instinct reaction, and I kicked her. She landed on the bed. I just walked out and I left her. I said, "Look, I'm not having this. I'm not." I just walked and left. And she says, "Oh, you're the only one who's left me and never come back." And I'm like thinking, "Oh, I don't know, with a little bit of sense then." As if like I was the bad person. But no, I can't be dealing with violence.
Both Diane and Ray realised that they had to get away from their partners in order to avoid repeating their parents' fate. They didn't want to become the victim of violence like their mum, or the perpetrator of it like their dad.
I can remember one night, he hadn't come home, and I'd gone to bed thinking, you know, I'm all on my own, why isn't he here? And he come back about 2 o'clock in the morning. He was drunk, and he was lying on the bed, and I was saying, "Where have you been?" And he wouldn't tell me, and he was laughing. And he was so drunk, he sort of just fell asleep quite quickly. And I really hated him. I really, really hated him. And I can remember getting a knife, thinking I could just kill you now, just kill you. And then I thought, why should I? Because if I kill you, you know, I'm going to get locked up in prison. And why should I get locked up in prison for the type of person you are? You know, you're not worth it. So I put the knife back and I didn't do it. But I come very, very close. And a part of me was thinking, you know, is this a genetic thing, you know, that I'm like my dad, that I'm going to kill people? But I know now as an adult, he was provoking me, pushing me, because it was domestic abuse that I was suffering, and I'd got to such a low ebb with him that I felt the need to end it and stop that pain, but luckily I didn't, because that would have caused a lot of pain for other people. So I managed not to do that.
Diane was keen to move on and find someone else, so on a night out in the pub, she asked her brother to set her up.
He fixed me up that night with somebody, and I got pregnant straight away in that relationship. He didn't want anything to do with me then. He said, you either have an abortion or, I'm not staying with you. But his family was saying, he'll come round when the baby's born, he'll come round when the baby's born. So I carried on with the pregnancy, hoping that he'd come round. But again, this is another guy that has let me down, and I went through the pregnancy very depressed. And on the day my son was born, I was crying my eyes up, and I thought this was what they call, postnatal depression, yeah. I was crying because my mum wasn't there to see my son. I was now a mum. That was a huge sort of change in my life, because I was now mum, and she wasn't there, and neither was his father, So it was a very, very upsetting time that day. And for the next sort of year or so, I was very depressed.
Eventually, Diane decided to go to college and study social work.
It absolutely changed the way I thought about life. And I realised that what I'd been through in the past I could perhaps use to help other people in the future. So I started that course and enjoyed it. And then I went on to university and I was doing a psychology degree. And my self-esteem was rising and rising all the time, and I was feeling, that I was doing some good. And that's when I met my ex-husband. And again, I thought he was the knight in shining armour that had come to look after me and my son. He was a lot older than me. He'd been in prison, a Category C prisoner. He'd been sentenced for 10 years and he'd served 12 because he wouldn't cooperate in prison. And again, I saw this person as someone I could help that needed my help. He was living in a probation hostel, he'd just got out. And I was working for probation as a supervisor, and I got to know him, and I thought, this is a very intelligent man, very, very intelligent man. He just needs steering in the right direction. So we, got together, and we had a daughter together.
Diane stayed with her knight in shining armour, and they were married for 13 years. But what she eventually came to realise was that she'd exposed herself to yet another type of abuse.
He was never ever violent to me, and I thought he was a good man. But what he did over those 13 years was totally destroy my self-esteem again, take me down to where I was originally. And he broke up all my contacts with my family as well. The only people that he wanted me to have contact with, really, was my dad. He insisted that my dad come to my wedding, which meant that nobody else would come. And it wasn't a nice day, the wedding day. I was crying upstairs, getting myself ready because my mum wasn't there to fuss over me. And none of my mum's family were going to come. So I was crying. Nobody knew, that I was crying before I went ahead for the wedding. And then just after the wedding, my dad's come for the meal with us all, and then he said, I've made his excuses and said I've got to go now, and I thought, for the sake of everybody else, really, why did I ask my dad to come? But it was my ex-husband that insisted that was the thing to do, and I know now, as I've sort of woke up to this, but I know that, he was siding with my dad because he too had been in prison, had, this sort of mentality. And I'd fell for it hook, line and sinker with him. So it took a long time to get out of that relationship. But I got out eventually.
Diane never expected to find love again, but little did she know that it was just around the corner. Having their dad come in and out of their lives hasn't been easy for Diane and Ray, especially as they have unanswered questions about what happened on the night of the murder. One day, Ray took his dad for a pint and plucked up the courage to ask what he'd always wanted to know.
I just asked him, I goes, why did you do it? And he just shrugged his shoulders. I don't know, Ray. And I was like, waiting for something else and nothing. I was just like, is that it? And I started crying. At the table in the pub, I started crying, a few tears coming, and he never told me nothing. When you've grown up to that certain age of where it's like, well, does it really matter now? I'm 39, coming 40 next year. And but some of me still feels like I'm only 8 years of age because something was taken away from me when I was 8. And I still feel like a little kid. I mean, a lot of adults say the stuff, everyone, you're always a big kid sometimes in your life, you're always a big kid. Yeah, I know that, but I felt like I've had to grow up without having a mother. So in a way, I haven't grown up, if that makes any sense. 31 years now, and still don't know what happened. And when you think about it, it just starts eating away again inside, but like when you don't think about it, you carry on with your life, you get on with this, it's put to the back of your mind, but it's always at the back of your mind. And hopefully one day I will find out what actually did happen, and I will get there and I will sit there and I'll demand him to tell me. I've thought nasty things, but I thought now I'm going to do it the right way. Tell my stepmother to get out the building or out the room or something. I just want to have a talk with my dad, and I want to be told some own truths and hopefully make me a better person.
Diane now has a new partner, Dan, and they live with Diane's 2 children above the pub that they run together.
Dan's absolutely great. I mean, he knows a lot about domestic violence, you know, and he knows a lot about fair, healthy relationships, so he's really, really supportive, and we, you know, both are of each other, so we get on really well. He doesn't like my dad, because when he looks at my dad, he can see a murderer in his eyes, you know, he can see that. And it has helped me for him to have that perspective, you know, because when I look at him, I always see a sad person, someone that's crying when I look in his eyes. So it has helped me to sort of be a bit stronger now, you know, and not let him affect, but he still does affect me if he comes. But, you know, Dan's helped me a lot.
Diane's father lives less than a mile away and can pop in for a pint at any time. As her mum's sisters don't want to see Ronald, this has made it difficult for Diane to have a proper relationship with them.
If they happen to bump into each other, I think it's my fault, you know, because they've both come to see me at the same time. So it's really difficult to, but I suppose, you know, if he stays away, that would be great, but until he dies himself, I'm not going to have this, you know, freedom really where, you know, the rest of my family can visit me when they want to and just see me, you know.
Diane also works locally as a domestic violence support worker, using her own experience and that of her mum to help other women.
I've learnt over the years about domestic abuse, how, you know, it changes people's lives, and it had obviously changed my mum's life at that time. So, you know, I think it was a good thing that she was leaving him, you know, that day. But she shouldn't have gone back to him.
Mate, one day goes by when I don't talk to my mum. Unless I've been on a session all day and I'm totally out of your face, then that's to be excused. But average day to day, I always ask myself questions, or ask my mum, not ask my mum questions, but like talk to her, and I answer the questions back in my own little head. So, but that gives me that comfort and that strength to carry on and not let things bother me so much.
As Diane moves on with her life, she has another ambition too.
My biggest dream would be to set up a service for children that went through this sort of thing. A service where they could, you know, talk to each other and feel that they're not alone, and get some counselling and get some specialist support that they really need away from the family. I would love to meet other people that have been through what I've been through, to pick each other up, I suppose, really, and help each other. But to realise that, you know, there's lots of people out there that have been through what I've been through. And they keep silent about it because it's so emotionally deep that nobody wants to talk about it. And often we are very much the forgotten victims of the worst scenario of domestic violence, you know. So it's something that is something I'd love to get organised and set up, yeah.
Running the pub gives Diane the security she's always wanted in her life.
I love the pub because, to me, my customers are my family that I haven't got, you know, and I'm pretty much mother hen behind the bar because I'm helping everybody with their problems. So I do like that, you know, that sort of replaced what I didn't have. You know, now I've got lots of friends and a huge family, you know, and there are lots of people that pop in. And most of them know what's happened, you know, so I don't have to hide. I can just be myself, and that's really great that I can do that.